All right. It's gonna be sort of take two, sort of a more condensed version of something a video I just made. Um, that one's a little bit long. I kind of ran a little bit, so I want to maybe condense it to get my point across better. Let's see if I could anyway. Um, I'm gonna lay this out. I'm gonna start out by uh, reading a little something I wrote down, but well, before I do that, let me explain. Yes, so to go off the last video, that has to do with, um, where all this social justice stuff comes from, and it has, the fact that it's, um, it has a history of academic and scientific backing that's, all these derived from a bunch of theories. But the thing is, the theories themselves are derived from, they're rooted in the old Marxist ideology, of the ruling class and the oppressed class, the working class. Um, as much as I read about it, I get the gist of, where this whole oppression idea comes from. Um, and, that's something, my issue with it is, what I wanted to lay out, what I laid out in the last video, but what I wanted to see if I can do a little bit better this time around, because it was a little bit long. So I'm going to start out with, reading what I wrote out before, as a sort of, basic layout. So here goes. People don't live in a vacuum. The choices they make have an effect on themselves and those around them, and time does not literally stop for anyone. The choices that any one person makes or doesn't make at a particular moment in time could have an effect on what happens to them next, whether they're being negatively affected by outside factors or not. I say this so obviously applies to people that most people overlook it, but I also say it's more of a constant reminder for poor people who may have to take more action to get or keep themselves out of disadvantageous situations. To add on to that, poorer or lower class peoples may not have the time, energy, luxury, or even resources necessary to even properly comprehend the nature of their oppressed status in its full and proper context. They probably have to decide more often where they should direct their personal resources, as is entirely their right to do. That said, I'd say it is on each and every disadvantaged individual in the first place whether they want to subscribe toward the idea that they're oppressed or not, and how to direct their personal resources accordingly. Now, what all that means is basically, that was in response to someone in a comment thread about one element of all this oppression stuff, being white privilege, but that's not the point. Just to give you an idea of where that came from. Now, the point of what I wrote is basically, I said a lot of things, right? First of all, the whole thing about people not living in a vacuum, the choices they make, that kind of goes, that's like in order of where, I say the response, of order of where all this, in order of the response to, them being, told they're oppressed or whatever, people saying that they are oppressed, I'd say that goes last. So I'm going to address that last. What I'll start with is what I said in the last video, basically the gist of what I understand from the Marxist ideology is that you have two classes, ruling class and oppressed class, right? Or the working class. The reason why the working class is in such a disadvantaged situation to the point where you call them oppressed is because, they're living in a system that disadvantages them, is because, or oppresses them, is because they don't have resources necessary to realizing their true potential as people, or they're not so as the ruling class has, or at least maybe closer, have resources to being closer to doing that. Therefore, they can't really be, they're not really free to be who they really are, because the way they are living, they're already living in a system that is that does not benefit them. You know, they have to work harder, and then even as hard as they work, they might not even really get to the point where they can really be free to be themselves, free past the system, where they're not held back because they don't have certain things. It's a little off of what it was saying, but that's basically what it was. That's basically what I understand from this argument of the the class system. So what I had wrote, what I had written regarding that has to do with, from the perspective of the working class, the oppressed class, at least as they've been designated. At what point, are they able to determine that they're oppressed in the first place? How do they get to decide that? And my problem is, what resources, must they have to determine that they are in such a status, and then, respond accordingly, and not just respond accordingly, but direct their personal resources accordingly. What resources do they have? Do they have to be able to comprehend the nature of the system? They're said to be, stuck in, oppressed by, let alone whether they want to subscribe to it or not, and then employ the resources necessary to argue against it or disagree with it, or agree with it with full understanding of its proper context. At what point are they able to do that? That's what I talked about in the last video, and what I'm going to do again is lay out, is kind of go into detail about it. So, well, how do we apply what I just asked, all the things just asked, to what's going on like now? And the thing is, so these ideas are not just coming out of thin air. They're not just being pulled out of, someone's ass or a bunch of people's asses. No, I mean, realistically speaking, it does have some sort of academic backing to it, and years of, some sort of scientific application to it, scientific theories are being applied. At least those theories are in the scientific community. Whether you want to argue how scientific they are, how scientifically valid or not, it's not really the point. At least not what I'm trying to lay out right now. The point is, they do have some sort of scientific support and academic support. And my thing is, okay, in terms of being able, from the perspective of the ruling class, of the working class, in terms of being able to comprehend what's being, these ideas are being thrown out in their favor, by those who are in these academic positions, who understand these things. They have, the privilege, you could say, to actually have the educational privilege of being able to comprehend these ideas and then throw them out, lay them out and teach people these things and say, hey, this is the world we're living in. These are the problems we're having. These are the problems, the changes we need to make. This is how we're oppressed and why, or how certain people are oppressed and why. These are changes we need to make in order to help them not be in this status anymore. And the people who are in this oppressed status may or may not necessarily have the resources to be able to comprehend, these academic theories being thrown out. That's what I was saying, basically, in a not so condensed way. There are people who are disadvantaged, at least on a basic, factual level. They may be disadvantaged somehow. They may not have the same educational resources that other people do. But with regard to these issues and these theories being thrown out by a certain sector of the academic community, the people in question who are disadvantaged, they may not have the academic resources and educational resources necessary to fully comprehend these theories, in which arguments that are, in which these proponents of social justice that argue in their favor, present them, lay them out. They may not be able to fully understand these theories, So it doesn't really benefit them to just go along with them and to, agree with, social justice advocates in their favor if they don't fully understand the theories in the first place. It doesn't really do the theories justice, because these people who are just, oh, well, I'm oppressed, and, without fully understanding the context in which, the oppression is stated, they can't, they're not really doing the whole movement justice. They're not really, they're almost, for lack of a better term, they're moving towards the group of sheep, or being sheep, falling in the realm of being sheep. That's not to insult their intelligence. I'm just saying, there's no way you're gonna expect. It's not realistic to expect everyone in the oppressed class, so to speak, and their different levels of, as laid out, at least in the context of social justice proponents. You can't expect certain people in certain levels to have the capability, at least in that point in time, of fully understanding the context of the arguments that you're laying out in their favor. You can't expect that. So that's one thing I was saying, and the thing is, if those people in question won't have the resources necessary to fully understand these arguments, let alone agree or disagree with them, how can they decide for themselves whether they're oppressed, and in that context, because they don't fully understand it? That's one problem I was having. And then this goes back to the working class in general anyway, at least laid out as much as I understand it, by the root Marxist ideology argument. At what point, what resources do the individuals who are in the working class, what resources do they need to have to determine whether they're oppressed or not in the first place? And act accordingly, because that's what you want in the end anyway. You want them to be able to you want them to be able to get to a point where they're not oppressed, right? Assuming that they're the only ones that can make those changes for themselves. They'd have to have enough understanding to make the changes themselves. And if they don't, they can't do it. Logically, there's no way for them to progress and go in that direction. Which is why I guess that's where the academics, the college students come in, the academia comes in. They're kind of the saviors. They're the ones who are, they're making it easier for these people to make those changes, because those people are not on the level required to make the changes themselves. Which is easy enough to understand in itself, but that's where also part of the problem comes in, because you have, at some point, you just have people in a position to tell you, hey, you're in this position, and we're trying to get you, out of it. But those people are not in a position at a certain point in time to decide for themselves whether they're actually in the position that other people claim they are. That's one problem I was having with this whole argument, root cause, and then from the just understanding the root argument and then translating it to now, and then that's just in terms of comprehending the nature of the situation in the first place, and then there's the fact that scientific academic ideas, especially those that are in the realm of science, they one of the ways in which they come to be in the first place, one of the things that makes scientific theory strong or whatever is that they're constantly put up to scrutiny, they're constantly tested. and to translate into just debates, philosophical debates, or any sort of just debates or over anything, just kind of less scientific things, so to speak, not necessarily strictly science related, you know, um, they're put up to scrutiny. Part of what makes ideas grow and um, or ideas stronger is when they're tested against opposing ideas. Um, and yes, you have a bunch of people doing that in the academic fields. Yes, I'm not going to say you don't. But what I'm saying is, if you have proponents on the side of this, on one side, that don't fully understand things, don't fully understand the context of what's being laid out in their favor, whether they agree or disagree it's not really substantial, you know. And then on top of that, here's the thing. Say these people get the educational resources necessary to understand these things. What follows next is whether the person decides to do anything with it, whether they decide to go in and then, make any further contributions in favor of these theories that have been put out or against them, because, it's something they can do. I mean, science doesn't care, it's like, I mean, it's in terms of scientific facts or whatever, it's what's objectively true or not, right? Or at least that's supposed to be the goal, isn't it? At the very least, so that's the thing that you get with science. It's like, either way, you're gonna, if these people if you have more people going into the fields of science and then being able to fully understand, excuse me, I'm just plugging my laptop in, fully understand or have the academic resources necessary to educational resources necessary to understand these things in their full scientific academic context, you might have some people that end up being like looking into these things and then developing different perspectives from a scientific academic standpoint. The very least, scientifically speaking, that's what you want, or that's what you should have in order to strengthen these ideas at the very least, if not further the progression of scientific thought and discourse in itself. And I think the reason I'm bringing that up, why I think it's kind of necessary, I think we need more counter arguments on a more academic scientific level against these theories in the first place, because those things have been in place for years now, and that's those things are changing. Those things are not only, I mean, they're changing laws, they're changing policies, they're and the thing is they're also they're affecting the minds of young students in a certain way. I'm not saying the students are being brainwashed necessarily. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it does have a strong influence on a significant chunk of students that go into these fields, that go to college, and it's like, here's the thing. That's not to say there are going to be other college students that come out and they're able to critically think, and then think critically to the point where while still disagreeing with these theories. What I'm saying is, you have a lot of people going in and being influenced by these theories that have a lot of academic backing to them. They may, in some cases, they're not necessarily, as scientifically sound as they claim to be. And the thing is, I see a lot of counter arguments now that I've been seeing over the last few years are not arguing against them on the same scientific level, academic level. They're not doing that, and I think that's what needs to be done more. I'm not the first person to say this. There's been another YouTuber that said this, at least one other that said this before. Tilda said it. And I think that's what we need, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. But and it's like, well, to do that, you need more people to go, to go to school, obviously, to get the education required up to get to that point. And I think that if there's any group that should get to that point in the first place, it's the people that are claimed to, to be the disadvantaged groups. I mean, they don't have the educational resources necessary to get there. I think, if anything, once they get them, that's what they should be doing. No, let me say and put it this way. I think in order to determine in its proper context whether they're actually in that oppressed status or not, they need to be able to develop those educational resources. They need to get those educational resources to be able to determine that for themselves, because otherwise whether they decide that they're in that status or not, they're not going to do it with the full academic understanding. They're not going to have that understanding. And I think that's what's missing. Since they're the group that's being, supposed to be affected by this the most, or whatever, I think it'd benefit them to understand in this proper context why the world around them is being changed to their benefit, or supposedly to their benefit. So that's why I'm throwing it out there. Which goes on to my last point about choices. It's like, here's the thing. People who are in more disadvantaged positions, in relation to these academic and scientific theories that are being put out there, they may not necessarily have, even if they had the educational capability or resources necessary to be able to comprehend the arguments being laid out in their favor, theories being laid out in their favor, or at least telling them that they're in this depressed status, they may not have the time, energy, or luxury of responding in the way that you'd expect them to, in terms of wanting to contribute to making those changes. The proponents of their being oppressed status suggest they should, as in like changing laws, or just joining in the activism. I honestly, to put it bluntly, some of these people just may not have the time for that. They may just need to get by, just work hard enough to get by right now, or keep themselves out of worse situations. Like, they may need to just be able to feed themselves all the time, feed their kids, just stay out of trouble. They may just have to work hard to do that shit. And it's like, the more time you spend, working towards one thing, working on those things, the less time you have to read up on like scientific studies, or to really delve into these like philosophical and sociological and scientific academic concepts, these ideologies. They may not have the time for that, or the energy for that, and that is quite the reality for some people out there. So to expect them to join in the fight, sort of activism, that's not realistic. And or to even just side with this whole thing and decide, oh yeah, I'm oppressed, I need this, I need that, to join in, expect their support. That's not realistic, and the choices they make affect themselves and the people around them. It's like, time's not going to stop for them, like I wrote, so they need to, I don't think, unless they have the resources necessary, again, to be able to comprehend these theories that are being laid out in favor of their oppressed status, they're not going, whatever support that they give is not going to be substantial enough, at least in my opinion, because it's like, well, then it's almost like you're just kind of mindlessly doing something. Like, if you don't fully understand it, why are you doing it? You know, to put it bluntly, I mean, for lack of a better way to put it, they just may not want to, you know, because it's like they're not worried about that. They're worried about just more. Everything else right now is more just immediate to them. They don't have the time to worry about fucking being oppressed, or even just a, being in a what's called, the oppressed group, however that's designated. If they're lumped in with other poor people, they may have the time to worry about other poor people. They might just be worried about themselves. Why would you expect them to give a fuck about other poor people? And toppling over the establishment unless they have some really strong reason to believe, without other people who aren't poor telling them this, why they're poor. It's like, let's have some other reason to believe it. They're not really going to be thinking about that, or I wouldn't expect them to. So that's the point I was throwing out there, the when you apply the root argument, at least as far as I understand it, to what's been going on today, situations today, how can you really see, at what point would you, from the perspective of those who are designated as the oppressed or working class, what point do you expect them to direct, how do you to direct their personal resources accordingly, to the situation? Like if they decide to subscribe to this idea, whether they're oppressed or not, and it's like, you could say, okay, well, it's a fact, if you read up on enough studies and academic theories in proponents, in support of this position that, we live in a oppressive system or whatever, if you're at the point where you're supportive of it and you're saying, well, I mean, it's a fact or not, whether these people agree, whether the people who are oppressed agree or not, we have enough evidence to demonstrate factually that they are living in a suppressive system. Okay, but you can't just, you could say that, but that doesn't really address how the people in question should respond. The oppressed people in question, they're still a major part of this. You can't ignore that. So they have to decide, they have to be able to decide how to respond to all of this. And if they don't, if they're not fully capable of understanding the nature of the situation, then as you laid it out for them, at least, how can they respond accordingly? So that's the problem I've been having, at least insofar as, like today with all this stuff, at least insofar as how it's laid out. If you understand, the root argument in the Marxist ideology, and you could say it's actually pretty important for someone like me to really think about it, because it's like, well, if you hadn't noticed, I'm black, and the whole thing going on today with all black people, blah blah blah. We're being living in this in structural racism and this white privilege and things like that, and I've had discussions and arguments with other black people who don't have a very nice opinion of whites and whatever, and who are pretty much on the in some way in support of the whole black people still oppressed argument and whatever arguments put forth. And I don't think they understand why I question these things a lot, and me and at least a few other black people who they also don't, they kind of disagree with. I don't think they understand why me and those other people question these ideas, and how, to go from there. We might think we're expected to behave. Why are we expected to go along with this idea? This is one of the reasons why. And it's not just black people. It's you got people who are gay or in the LGBT community who might not subscribe to this idea too, and it's like, that's where the disconnect comes in, because you have people who are on the social justice side and who might see those people in the designated oppressed groups questioning these ideas, being laid out to them, if not outright disagreeing. And they're like, well, why are you disagreeing? And then they might get caught, they might be labeled an outcast. I mean, if there's any black person out there who, was against white people, and they subscribe to the whole, we're living in a structurally racist country, is racist system thing, and they legit, any of you sincerely want to understand why I question these things, and how, how I would think, after having all this stuff laid out to me, how I would think I'm expected to behave. This is one of the reasons why, So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. This one was a little bit long too, but I think it was a little bit more condensed, and I think might have got my point across better. So I'm gonna put both of them up. And again, I mean, if you want to understand, I mean, to wrap things up, to sum up my whole point in this video, I'm gonna, I'll just read off again what I wrote, and that'll be it. I'll just close off with that. So here goes. People don't live in a vacuum. The choices they make have an effect on themselves and those around them, and time literally does not stop for anyone. The choices that any one person makes or doesn't make at any particular moment in time could have an effect on what happens to them next, whether they're being negatively affected by outside factors or not. I say this so obviously applies to everyone that most people overlook it, but I also say it's more of a constant reminder for poorer people who may have to take more action to get or keep themselves out of disadvantaged situations. To add on to that, poorer or lower class peoples may not have the time, energy, luxury, or even resources necessary to even properly comprehend the nature of their oppressed status in its full and proper context. They probably have to decide more often where they should direct their personal resources, as is entirely their right to do. That said, I say it is on each and every disadvantaged individual in the first place whether they want to subscribe toward the idea that they're oppressed or not, and how to direct their personal resources accordingly. So there you go. Yeah, I hope everything I said was clear enough, more clearer than last time. I'm gonna throw both of them up. If anyone else has anything to add on to this, or just something to give me something to think about, by all means, I may not get to it right away, but I'll keep it in mind, and I'll get to it when I can, because I'm kind of busy nowadays. Anyway, yeah. So that's all for now. Until next time.